military police contain the crowd, but clashes soon break out. Federal marshals arrest several who attempt to break through the protective line. Reinforcing the marshals, a second wave of MPs with fixed bayonets in scabbards move into position. Some 400 demonstrators are arrested, 2 soldiers are injured, and tear gas is used. 6 break into a Pentagon side door, but are quickly apprehended in the day-long disturbance. The next day, campfires are lighted to hold off the autumn chill. The same weekend saw nationwide demonstrations supporting American GIs in Vietnam. The Pentagon protest was less violent in its second day of sitting in.
So, Mr. Mann, what was your part in the Vietnam War?
At that period of time, I was a senior in high school, and it was a draft. My number was 131. I remember it to this day. That it's like, and I prayed that they would not get as high as 131. And luckily for me, they did not. So I never went over to, I didn't have to go over to serve. And probably very glad about that, because I really did not want to go. I was living in Chicago at the time, or outside Chicago, and there were a lot of student protests, a lot of anger about this conflict, to the point that there were regular riots in the streets of Chicago to anti-war protests.
All right, so you talked about the anti-war protests. Was there any sort of pro-war? Were there any pro-war feelings going about? Was there any pressure for you to do something else, to fight instead? I don't know.
I don't remember any pro-war feelings, because most time the anti-war sentiment was so strong that took over the news reports every single night. Those were the be it on television or be it in the newspapers, it was every day. It was just very, very strong anti-war. You just didn't hear about anybody saying, "Oh, good, no, we deserve to be over in Vietnam fighting to stop communism from spreading." Most of us, being in the United States, well, we're in the United States. How do we know that communism is going to really spread? But there was quite a bit of propaganda on both sides against the war, and it was a useless war, and why were we there? Because it wasn't. There was even some talk about it's not really a war; it's a police action to stop the spread of communism. So I would say that I certainly wasn't pro-war, but I did not get out and protest with signs or anything of that nature.
What sort of things would you see on TV, read the newspapers, and whatnot? You said that there was a lot of anti-war action going on.
What the television showed was usually protesters throwing things at the police. The police used water cannons and a variety of tactics, rubber bullets, tear gas to disperse the crowds. So the television, the news reporting actually showed they skewed it. So they almost skewed it that it was the police that were guilty at this point of poor actions against the demonstrators. What they didn't show was the demonstrators taking styrofoam balls or aluminum foil balls, sticking nails in them, and then hurling those at the police or hurling bricks at the police. They even had balloons filled with pee and hurled those at the police. So you didn't see that part of it, and that was not reported. So there was good and bad on both sides. So it shouldn't have been just the police were wrong in this whole thing, because the demonstrators clearly were doing some things that were not appropriate.
Did you know anyone, or were you friends with anyone that took part in the protests?
In the protests, no. And I can't even say that I know of anybody that actually, during my year in high school, that went over to serve. I don't know. At that point in my senior year, 1969, if you were going to college, you were automatically deferred. So a lot of students went to college to make sure that they could get deferred. So I didn't have to go over to Canada if I didn't want to go to the war. I just had to make sure that my grades were good enough and that I could get into college. My brother, who's a year younger than I am, he had a lower number than mine, and that was the year that they scrapped the college deferment. So if they had gotten to his number, he would have had to go. But luckily the war ended, and he was never called up.
What were your personal political views about the war?
I guess I didn't understand it as much as I probably should have. That's a little while ago. I was against it. I didn't think that we needed to be fighting over there. And I guess I just didn't understand about this spread of communism. It's like, I don't know, 9,000 miles away. I mean, what are we worried about? And I was pretty good about reading newspapers and so forth. But again, you've got to watch out for what's reported and what's not reported. So I tried to keep an open view on this. I still didn't agree with the war, however.
And so, had you not opted for deferment, what do you think you would have done? Had that deferment not been an option and you were drafted, what would you have done?
Good question.
You're talking about going to Canada. I'm just not sure. Is that a real?
Would I go to Canada or not? I can honestly say I don't know. If I was drafted and I had to go, there were just a lot of bad things that were going on in Southeast Asia, and it's not a place that I wanted to be personally. But I can say that now. Back then, it's like, okay, I didn't want to be thrown in jail either for draft evasion. So it was a choice, either go to the war or go to Canada. And I don't know that I don't know what my decision would have been. Right now, I might have gone to Canada if it was maybe 60% to Canada, 40% to the war. But I did not want to go to prison either.
Yeah, that's understandable. So if you could go back, would you have done anything differently?
What do you mean by in other words, about my decision?
Yeah, about your decision to defer. I don't know. Would you have decided to protest more, maybe gotten involved with the things that you did see on TV? Maybe tried to start something else, some sort of other movement. What would you have done?
Possibly start another movement. I think, I'm forgetting the term for it right now. Peaceful resistance. Thoreau's, when you, like Mahatma Gandhi, sit-ins and so forth, and then not just, this is wrong. So you get people that are not happy with the situation and sit in a government office or in front of a government office to protest. That, in my mind, would have been a possibility because I didn't agree with what was going on, and I don't think the powers that be, our president, was sharing all the information with us. So I probably would have protested, but peacefully.
And so would you say that the protests that you did witness were more hostile than anything else there?
I'd say the majority of the ones that were shown on television were hostile. They didn't, well, because it was more interesting. Interesting in quotation marks, however, because, great news feed at 6 o'clock, showing water cannons being, used on American citizens that were protesting. Heck of a lot better than having a bunch of people just sit down in a public square and stop traffic, etc., which happened, and the police removed each one of them into paddy wagons.
I think that's good.
Yeah. Anything else I can?
Oh wait, actually, one more question.
Sure.
How did you see that returning vets were treated after the war, or even during?
I didn't. I don't think they were treated well, but I never saw anything firsthand, so I can't really answer that truthfully. But from things that I've seen on television, the stress that they endured over there, and our VA hospitals were not up to par when they came home, and it was hard for some people to, for a lot of the soldiers to readjust to a way of life that, the white picket fence and the nice flowers and the flower pots in front of the house, and that was not evident over in Vietnam.